The scent of blood hit the air before the screaming started. Kira froze in the doorway of the great hall, her arms full of fresh linens that suddenly felt like dead weight. The monthly gathering hadn't even begun, but something was wrong. The metallic tang wasn't coming from outside. It was here, in this room full of her packmates. Then she saw him. Alpha King Dominic stood at the center of the hall, his massive frame rigid with barely contained rage. His dark eyes swept the crowd of wolves assembled before him, and when his gaze landed on the crumpled form at his feet, Kira's stomach dropped. Marcus, one of the younger betas, lay motionless on the polished marble floor, blood seeping from claw marks across his chest. "Let this be a lesson," Dominic's voice boomed through the sudden silence. "Question my authority again, and you'll face worse than a few scratches." Kira pressed herself against the doorframe, hoping to slip away unnoticed. As an Omega, she had no business witnessing pack discipline. Her job was simple: clean, serve, and stay invisible. But as she took a careful step backward, her hip caught the edge of a decorative table. The crash of expensive crystal hitting marble echoed like gunshots. Every head in the room turned toward her. Dominic's nostrils flared as he scented the air, and his lips curled into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so cold. Well, our little ghost finally shows herself." Heat flooded Kira's cheeks as hundreds of eyes fixed on her. She clutched the linens tighter, using them as a shield against the weight of their stares. "I'm sorry, Alpha King. I was just what?" He began walking toward her, each step deliberate and predatory. "Eavesdropping? Spying on pack business that's far above your station?" "No, sir. I was bringing fresh bedding for the guest quarters." Her voice came out smaller than she intended, and she hated herself for it. The crowd parted as Dominic approached, and Kira caught sight of the other pack members' faces. Some looked bored, others amused. A few of the higher-ranking wolves wore expressions of anticipation, as if they were about to witness entertainment. Beta James, Dominic's second-in-command, stepped forward with a slight smirk. "Careful, Alpha. You might scare our little cleaning lady." The comment drew scattered laughter from the crowd, and Kira's jaw tightened. She'd known James since they were pups, back when pack hierarchy hadn't mattered as much. Back when he'd actually treated her like a person instead of furniture. Scared, Dominic stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. At 6'4", he towered over her 5'6" frame, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "No, I don't think our Kira scares easily. Do you, little wolf?" The way he said her name made her skin crawl, like he was tasting something unpleasant. "I should go," she said quietly. "I have work to finish before the gathering begins." "Work?" He said the word like it was foreign. "Tell me, what exactly does an Omega contribute to this pack besides menial labor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the crowd grew quiet again, sensing the shift in Dominic's mood. This wasn't casual mockery anymore, it was something darker. Kira kept her voice steady. "I do whatever the pack needs." "Whatever the pack needs," he repeated slowly. "How noble. And what happens when what the pack needs is strength? Speed. The ability to fight for our territory." His eyes glittered with malice. "What happens when we need warriors, not maids?" She could feel her wolf stirring beneath her skin, responding to the challenge in his tone. For 17 years, she'd kept that part of herself locked away, hidden from everyone in the pack. They saw what she wanted them to see, a weak Omega, barely worth notice. They had no idea what she really was. "I do my part," she said carefully. Dominic laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Your part? Your part is to serve your betters and stay out of the way. Your part is to accept that you are the weakest link in our pack, a burden we carry out of tradition rather than necessity." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut deep. Around them, more wolves began to laugh and murmur agreement. Someone called out, "Tell her Alpha." Another voice added, "About time someone said it." Kira's hands began to shake, but not from fear or humiliation. It was rage, pure and burning, threatening to consume her from the inside out. Her wolf was clawing at her mental barriers, desperate to show these fools exactly how weak she wasn't. She could take Dominic. She knew it with bone-deep certainty. Years of secret training, of pushing her body and her wolf to their limits, had made her faster and stronger than any of them realized. She could have him on his back in seconds, could show this entire room that their precious Alpha King was nothing more than an oversized bully. But that would mean revealing everything. It would mean admitting the lie she'd been living for years, the carefully constructed facade that kept her safe from questions she couldn't answer. Instead, She did what she'd always done. She bowed her head and took it. "You're right, Alpha King," she said, the words like ash in her mouth. "I apologize for interrupting." "Apologize?" His voice rose with theatrical outrage. "You think a simple apology erases the disrespect you've shown? Walking into pack business like you have any right to be here." Beta James stepped closer, feeding off his alpha's energy. Maybe she needs a reminder of her place. The crowd pressed in around them, forming a loose circle. Kira could smell their excitement, their anticipation of violence. Some of them had probably been hoping for this kind of entertainment when they arrived tonight. "Please," she said quietly, still clutching the linens. "I just want to do my job." "Your job," Dominic sneered, "is to remember that you are nothing. A mistake of genetics, a wolf so pathetic that you can barely maintain your human form during the full moon. You contribute nothing to this pack except..." "Except what?" The words escaped before she could stop them, sharp and challenging. The sudden silence was deafening. Even Dominic looked surprised, his eyes widening slightly at the steel in her voice. Kira realized her mistake immediately. She'd let her mask slip, let them see a glimpse of the fire that burned beneath her carefully crafted weakness. Her wolf was still pushing against her control, urging her to stand tall, to fight back, to show them what she really was. But she couldn't. Not here. Not now. Not ever. So she did the hardest thing she'd ever done. She forced herself to shrink, to curve her shoulders inward and drop her gaze to the floor. "I'm sorry, Alpha King. I misspoke." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his predator's instincts clearly sensing something off about her reaction. But whatever he saw, he seemed to dismiss it as quickly as it had appeared. "Yes," he said finally, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You did misspeak. And now everyone here gets to see exactly what happens when the weakest member of our pack forgets her place." He reached out and knocked the linens from her arms. The clean sheets scattered across the marble floor, some landing in puddles of Marcus's blood. "Clean it up," he commanded. "All of it. And maybe next time you'll remember that omegas should be seen and not heard." The crowd laughed and began to disperse, their entertainment concluded. A few wolves stepped deliberately on the fallen linens as they passed, grinding dirt and blood deeper into the fabric. Kira knelt on the cold marble and began gathering the ruined sheets, her movements mechanical and precise. She didn't look up as boots passed inches from her hands. She didn't react when someone accidentally kicked one of the bundles away from her reach. She just cleaned as she always did. But inside, her wolf was no longer clawing at her barriers. Instead, it was planning, calculating, remembering every face in that crowd, every voice that had laughed at her humiliation. They thought they knew what she was. They thought they had her figured out. They had no idea how wrong they were. As the last of the pack members filed out of the great hall, leaving her alone with the mess and the lingering scent of blood, Kira finally allowed herself to look up. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished marble, and for just a moment, her eyes flashed with golden fire. Soon, she promised herself. Soon they would all learn the truth about their weakest link. But first, she had a floor to clean. Chapter 2. 3 days after her humiliation in the Great Hall, Kira was scrubbing the patrol barracks when she heard the shouting. She paused, her brush dripping soapy water back into the bucket. The voices were coming from the courtyard outside, multiple male voices, raised in anger, and beneath them, something that made her blood freeze. An old woman crying. Kira dropped the brush and moved to the narrow window. Through the grimy glass, she could see 3 of Dominic's patrol wolves surrounding a hunched figure in threadbare clothes. Even from a distance, she recognized Meredith, one of the pack's oldest omegas. The woman had to be pushing 70, her wolf too weak now to even shift during full moons. "Please," Meredith's voice carried across the courtyard, thin and desperate. "I just need another week. My grandson sent money, but the letter was delayed." Delayed? The largest of the patrol wolves, Fletcher, she thought his name was, grabbed the elderly woman's arm roughly. "That's what you said last month, old woman. The Alpha King doesn't accept excuses." "But I have it now," Meredith fumbled in her coat pocket with shaking hands. "I can pay half today and the rest." "Half isn't good enough." This from another guard, lean and cruel-faced. "Garrett. Full payment was due 3 days ago." The third wolf, a stocky male named Reed, circled behind Meredith like a predator. "Maybe a few nights in the detention cells will help your memory. Or better yet, maybe it's time this pack stopped carrying dead weight." Kira's hands pressed against the windowsill hard enough to leave marks in the wood. She should walk away. Mind her own business. Keep her head down like she always did. But Meredith had been kind to her when no one else bothered. Had slipped her extra food during the lean winter months when omegas ate last. Had never once treated her like she was invisible. Before she could talk herself out of it, Kira was moving. She burst through the barracks door and strode across the courtyard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Let her go. All four heads turned toward her. Fletcher's grip on Meredith's arm tightened, and the old woman's eyes went wide with fear, not for herself but for Kira. Well, well, Garrett sneered. Look what crawled out of the woodwork. The cleaning lady thinks she has something to say. I said let her go. Kira's voice was steady, controlled. She stopped just out of arm's reach, every muscle in her body coiled and ready. Meredith, are you hurt? Child, no, the old woman whispered. Go back inside. This isn't your concern. Actually, it is. Kira kept her eyes on the patrol wolves, reading their postures, cataloging their positions. Fletcher was the biggest threat, dominant, aggressive, used to intimidation. Garrett was faster but overconfident. Reed was the wild card, circling like he was looking for an opening to strike. All three were larger than her. All three were trained fighters. None of them had spent years learning to kill in silence. Since when does an Omega concern herself with pack business? Fletcher's voice dripped with contempt. Especially one who can't even keep her mouth shut in front of the Alpha King. The reference to her humiliation 3 days ago sent heat flooding through her veins. But it also reminded her where she was, what she was supposed to be. Weak. Submissive. Invisible. Except Meredith was still crying, and these bastards were enjoying it. She's an elder, Kira said quietly. She deserves respect. Reed laughed, a harsh sound that made her skin crawl. Respect? She's a burden. Just like you. Maybe we should solve both problems at once. He lunged forward, fast and vicious, clearly intending to teach the mouthy Omega a lesson about knowing her place. Kira's body reacted before her mind could stop it. She sidestepped Reed's charge with liquid grace, her hand shooting out to catch his extended wrist. A simple twist, a pivot of her hips, and suddenly Reed was flying through the air to land hard against the stone wall of the barracks. The courtyard went dead silent. Kira stood frozen, staring at her own hands. Hands that were calloused from years of weapons training, not just scrub brushes. Hands that had just moved with the kind of precision that took decades to master. Hands that had just revealed everything. What the hell? Fletcher started forward, but froze as a new scent hit the air. Alpha musk. Dominant and overwhelming. Interesting. Dominic's voice cut through the silence like a blade. He stood in the archway leading to the main house, and from his relaxed posture, Kira realized he'd been watching for some time. How much had he seen? Alpha King. Fletcher immediately dropped to one knee, dragging Meredith with him. We were just collecting overdue taxes. This Omega interfered. I can see what happened. Dominic's dark eyes never left Kira's face as he walked toward them. The question is how it happened. Kira's mind raced. She could lie. Claim it was luck, adrenaline, anything but the truth. But as Dominic got closer, she saw the calculating intelligence in his gaze. He was already putting pieces together, already asking questions she couldn't answer. Reed, Dominic said without looking away from her. Get up. The patrol wolf groaned as he pushed himself off the ground, one hand pressed to his ribs. Sir, she moved like she's been trained. Dominic completed the sentence, his voice deadly quiet. Extensively trained. He stopped directly in front of Kira, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark brown eyes. That was no lucky hit, was it, little wolf? Every instinct screamed at her to run, to shift and disappear into the forest before he could ask more questions. But Meredith was still kneeling on the cold stone, still trembling with fear and confusion. He was going to hurt her, Kira said instead. So you heard him first. Dominic tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Where did an Omega learn to fight like that? The lie came easily, worn smooth by years of practice. My father taught me basic self-defense before he died. In case I ever needed to protect myself. Basic self-defense. He repeated the words slowly, skeptically. That throw was textbook advanced combat training. Military precision. Fletcher and Garrett exchanged glances, clearly lost. Reed was still clutching his ribs, staring at Kira like she'd grown a second head. I don't know what you mean, Kira said. Dominic laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You know exactly what I mean. The question is what else you're hiding. He began to circle her, predatory and focused. An Omega who can take down a trained patrol wolf. An Omega with calluses on her hands from weapons, not just cleaning supplies. Kira's heart stopped. She'd been so careful to wear gloves, to to keep her hands hidden. When had he noticed? An Omega, he continued, who speaks with authority when she thinks no one is listening, who carries herself like a warrior when she forgets to slouch. Too much. He'd seen too much. I don't know what you want me to say, she whispered. I want you to tell me the truth. He stopped in front of her again, and this time his voice carried the weight of an alpha command. But we both know you won't. Not here. Not now. The compulsion of his command pressed against her mind, seeking cracks in her mental shields. For a moment she wavered. It would be so easy to let it all spill out, to stop carrying the weight of so many secrets. But the truth would get her killed, would get innocent people killed. So she stood silent, meeting his gaze with as much defiance as she dared. Dominic smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Very well. If you won't tell me who you really are, perhaps you'll show me. Alpha King. Fletcher sounded confused. A challenge, Dominic announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Formal combat in the fighting ring. Kira's blood turned to ice. What? You think you can stand up to my wolves? His smile widened, showing too many teeth. Prove you can stand up to me. The words hit her like a physical blow. A formal challenge from an Alpha King was no casual affair. It was a blood ritual, witnessed by the entire pack and binding under ancient law. Sir, Garrett stepped forward hesitantly. She's just an Omega. Surely. Just an Omega? Dominic's voice rose with theatrical disbelief. An Omega who just put one of my trained fighters on his ass without breaking a sweat? No, gentlemen. Our little cleaning lady is much more than she appears. Around them, other pack members were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion and the scent of alpha authority. Word would spread quickly. By evening, the entire pack would know about the challenge. There was no backing down now. The stakes, Dominic continued, his eyes still locked on hers. Victory means elevation to beta rank. Full recognition and authority within the pack hierarchy. Murmurs of shock rippled through the growing crowd. An Omega elevated to beta rank was virtually unheard of. And defeat? Kira's voice came out steadier than she felt. His smile turned predatory. Exile from Packlands forever. You'll have 24 hours to leave our territory and never return. The crowd fell silent. Exile was a death sentence for most wolves. Cut off from pack bonds, from the safety and support of their community. Few survived more than a year alone. Kira looked at Meredith, still kneeling on the stone, tears streaming down her weathered face. The old woman was shaking her head frantically, silently begging Kira to walk away. But if she walked away now, what would happen to Meredith? What would happen to every other Omega these bastards decided to terrorize? And what would happen when Dominic kept digging into her past, kept asking questions she couldn't answer? At least this way, she could control the revelation. She could show them just enough to win without exposing the full extent of what she was capable of. I accept, she said clearly. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers and nervous laughter. Someone called out, "Is she insane?" Another voice added, "This should be interesting." Dominic's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Excellent. Tomorrow night, during the full moon, the entire pack will witness our little Omega's true capabilities. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Spread the word. Tomorrow night, we'll finally see what secrets our weakest member has been keeping. As he walked away, followed by his patrol wolves, Kira helped Meredith to her feet. The old woman clutched her arm with surprisingly strong fingers. "Child, what have you done?" she whispered. Kira looked at her calloused hands, no longer bothering to hide them. Tomorrow night, everyone would see exactly what she'd done to survive. What she'd become. The question was whether she could control how much they learned, and whether she could win without revealing the most dangerous secret of all. Chapter 3. Kira couldn't sleep. She lay on her narrow cot in the Omega quarters, staring at the water-stained ceiling while her mind churned with memories she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. The formal challenge was less than 18 hours away, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw blood on her hands. Not again, she told herself. Never again. But the wolf inside her was restless, pacing like a caged animal. It remembered the thrill of the fight, the rush of victory, the roar of the crowd chanting her name. Shadow! 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 She rolled over and buried her face in her thin pillow, trying to block out the phantom sounds. She wasn't the shadow anymore. That life was dead and buried, along with the wolf who'd made her abandon it. A soft knock on her door made her freeze. Kira! Meredith's voice was barely a whisper. Are you awake, child? Kira sat up and padded to the door, opening it just wide enough to see the elderly Omega's worried face. You should be sleeping. It's past midnight. So should you. Meredith pushed inside, closing the door behind her. But I suspect neither of us will rest easy tonight. The old woman moved to Kira's single chair and settled into it with a soft grunt. In the moonlight streaming through the small window, her face looked ancient, carved with lines of worry and fear. Meredith, about today. Don't. The elder held up a weathered hand. Don't you dare apologize for standing up for me. I've lived long enough to know the difference between foolishness and courage. Kira sat on the edge of her cot, clasping her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Then you know this is foolishness. Is it? Meredith's sharp eyes studied her in the dim light. That move you used on Reed, I've seen it before. Ice flooded Kira's veins. What do you mean? My late husband was a gambling man, Meredith said quietly. Lost more money than we could afford at the underground fighting rings. I went with him a few times, trying to talk sense into him. She paused, her voice growing distant. There was a fighter there. Young woman, maybe your age. Called herself the Shadow. Kira's heart stopped beating. She was magnificent, Meredith continued. Fast as lightning, precise as a surgeon. Never saw her lose a match. The crowd worshipped her. Her eyes fixed on Kira's face. She had the same eyes as you, child. Same hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a night patrol called out the all clear. I don't know what you're talking about, Kira whispered. Meredith smiled sadly. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know why you've been hiding in plain sight for 2 years, scrubbing floors and pretending to be weak. I am weak. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Child, I may be old, but I'm not blind. You've been doing penance for something. Carrying guilt that's eating you alive. Meredith leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. What happened to make the shadow disappear? The words spilled out before Kira could stop them. I killed him. 2 years ago. The crimson cage was packed to capacity, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and the metallic scent of blood. Kira stood in the fighter's tunnel, bouncing on her toes as the crowd above roared her name. Shadow! 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 She was undefeated in 43 matches across 3 territories. Tonight would be 44, and then she could finally buy her way out of this life. She had enough money saved to disappear completely, to start fresh somewhere far from the underground world that had shaped her. You ready for this, sweetheart? Marcus, her handler, appeared beside her with his usual predatory grin. Kid, you're fighting tonight is green, but he's got reach on you. And he's hungry. Kira rolled her shoulders, feeling her muscles warm and loose. They're all hungry. It doesn't matter. That's my girl. Marcus slapped her on the back. Go show them why you're the queen of this ring. The tunnel door opened, and Kira stepped into the blazing lights of the arena. The crowd erupted, a wall of sound that hit her like a physical force. She raised her fists in acknowledgement, drinking in their adoration. Across the ring, her opponent waited. Young, maybe 20, with the lean build of a natural fighter. His dark hair was pulled back, and when he looked at her, she saw determination in his green eyes. But also something else. Something that made her wolf uneasy. Desperation. The referee called them to center ring. Clean fight, he growled. First blood or submission. Nothing lethal. Kira nodded, but her attention was on her opponent. Up close, she could see the slight tremor in his hands, smell the fear beneath his bravado. This wasn't just another fight for him. This was something more. Good luck, she said quietly. He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. I can't lose tonight. I won't. The bell rang. He came at her hard and fast, all aggression and no technique. Kira danced backward, easily avoiding his wild swings while the crowd booed his sloppy form. She could end this in seconds, a quick takedown, a submission hold, and it would be over. But something held her back. Maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, or the way his hands shook between combinations. Whatever it was, she found herself going easy on him, giving him chances to recover when she should have pressed her advantage. Come on, Shadow, someone screamed from the crowd. Finish him. The young wolf heard it too, and something in his face changed. The desperation turned to rage, and suddenly he wasn't holding back anymore. He shifted partially, his nails extending into claws, his teeth lengthening. The crowd went wild. Partial shifts were legal but dangerous, turning boxing matches into something more primal. Kira shifted to match him, her own wolf rising to meet the threat. Now they were fighting for real, supernatural strength and speed, turning their movements into blurs. He caught her with a backhand that sent her staggering, claws raking across her ribs. Blood flowed, and the crowd's roar became deafening. First blood should have ended it, but the young wolf kept coming, lost in the fury of his shift. Kira's training took over. She sidestepped his next charge and drove her elbow into his temple with surgical precision, a move designed to stun, not kill. But he was moving faster than she'd calculated, and the angle was wrong. The impact sent him crashing to the canvas, his partially shifted form reverting to human as he hit the ground. He didn't get up. He never got up. The crowd fell silent as the referee knelt beside the motionless fighter. Kira stood frozen, her hands still raised in a fighting stance, as the seconds stretched into eternity. "He's dead," the referee said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She dropped to her knees beside the young wolf, her hands hovering over his still chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. The fights were dangerous but rarely lethal. She'd been so careful, so controlled. "It was an accident," Marcus was saying to someone, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Clean hit, just bad luck." But Kira wasn't listening. She was staring at the dead wolf's face, at the piece that had replaced his desperation. He looked even younger in death, barely more than a boy. Later, she would learn his name was Connor Blackwood, that he'd been fighting to pay for his sister's medical treatments, that he'd only taken the match because his family was desperate, that he was the son of a prominent pack advisor named Garrett. His name was Connor, Kira whispered, pulling herself back to the present. Connor Blackwood. Meredith's intake of breath was sharp and sudden. "Garrett's boy. You knew him?" "I knew of him. Sweet child from what I heard. Garrett never got over losing him." The old woman's voice was heavy with understanding. "That's why you disappeared. That's why you've been punishing yourself." Kira nodded, not trusting her voice. The guilt was a living thing inside her chest, clawing at her ribs with every breath. "Child," Meredith said softly, "accidents happen. Even in that world, death was always a risk." "It wasn't supposed to be," Kira's voice cracked. "I was so much better than him. I should have been able to control it, to pull back before." She stopped, choking on the words. "And you've been carrying that burden alone for 2 years. I deserve to carry it." Meredith was quiet for a long moment, then stood and moved to sit beside Kira on the narrow cot. Her weathered hand found Kira's and squeezed gently. "Tomorrow night, when you face Dominic, what will you do?" "I don't know." The admission felt like another defeat. "If I fight like I used to, I might hurt him. Might kill him. But if I hold back, he'll destroy you. Maybe that's what I deserve." "Stop." Meredith's voice carried surprising steel. "You think Connor would want this? You think he'd want you to waste your life in penance?" Kira looked up, tears blurring her vision. "How can you say that? I killed him. You made a mistake. A terrible, tragic mistake, but a mistake nonetheless." The elder's grip tightened. "And you've been punishing yourself ever since. But punishment without purpose is just another form of waste." Before Kira could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy boots, moving with purpose. They stopped outside her door, and a moment later, someone knocked. "Open up." The voice was unfamiliar, gruff with authority. Kira and Meredith exchanged glances. It was well past midnight. No legitimate pack business would require Omega attention at this hour. The knock came again, harder this time. "I know you're in there. Open the door or I'll break it down." Kira stood slowly and moved to the door. "Who is it?" Someone who knew Connor Blackwood. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Her hand froze on the door handle as ice flooded her veins. "That's right," the voice continued, and now she could hear the satisfaction in it. "I know exactly who you are, Shadow. And tomorrow night, when you face the Alpha King, you're going to pay for what you did to my son." "Garrett." It was Garrett outside her door. Behind her, Meredith gasped softly. "How did he find out?" Kira's mind raced. She'd been so careful, so thorough in covering her tracks. She'd changed her name, her appearance, even her scent using rare herbs that masked her natural pheromones. No one should have been able to connect Kira the Omega to the Shadow. "I've been watching you," Garrett continued, his voice muffled by the door but heavy with malice. "Ever since you arrived 2 years ago, something felt familiar. But I couldn't place it until today, when you moved like the fighter who killed my boy." "Garrett," Kira said carefully, "I don't know what you think you know. I know you're a murderer." His voice turned vicious. "I know you killed Connor in that hellhole they called the Crimson Cage. I know you ran like a coward instead of facing the consequences." The truth hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. There was no point in denying it now. "It was an accident," she said quietly. Garrett's laugh was harsh and broken. "An accident? You were a professional killer, and my son was barely more than a child. You could have pulled back, could have shown mercy, but you didn't. I tried. You tried nothing. The door shuddered as he slammed his fist against it. You saw an easy victory and you took it, consequences be damned. Kira pressed her back against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her worst nightmare, not just being discovered, but facing the father of the wolf she'd killed. What do you want? She whispered. Justice. The word was cold and final. Tomorrow night, when you fight the Alpha King, you'll face more than just a challenge. You'll face judgment for what you did to my family. Garrett, please. Enjoy your last night of freedom, Shadow. Because tomorrow, one way or another, you'll pay for Connor's death. His footsteps retreated down the hallway, leaving Kira and Meredith alone with the weight of his words. He's going to tell Dominic, Meredith said quietly. Kira nodded, sliding down the wall to sit heavily on the floor. It doesn't matter. After tomorrow night, everyone will know anyway. What will you do? Kira looked at her hands again. Hands that had once been weapons, hands that had taken a life. Tomorrow night, she would have to decide who she really was. The broken Omega seeking redemption, or the Shadow, undefeated and deadly. Either way, she was running out of time to hide. Chapter 4. The abandoned textile mill stood like a skeleton against the pre-dawn sky, its broken windows staring out over the forest like empty eye sockets. Kira slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, her movements silent despite the debris scattered across the cracked pavement. She'd discovered this place 6 months ago while running patrol routes for the pack. The mill had been closed for over a decade, left to rot when the human company moved operations overseas. Now it served as her sanctuary, the one place she could drop her carefully constructed mask and remember who she used to be. Inside the main floor, shafts of moonlight cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Kira moved to the center of the vast space, where years of secret training had worn smooth circles in the concrete floor. She closed her eyes and let the shadow rise. Her body moved like liquid mercury, flowing from stance to stance with lethal grace. A high kick that would have shattered ribs, followed by a spinning elbow strike aimed at an invisible opponent's temple. Her muscles remembered every technique, every combination, as if 2 years of dormancy had been merely a blink. She shifted into wolf form mid-movement, the transformation seamless and controlled. Her wolf was larger than most females, built for speed and power in equal measure. Black as midnight with silver markings that had earned her the name Shadow, she was a predator in every sense of the word. But as she flowed back to human form and continued her deadly dance, guilt twisted in her stomach. Every move, every strike, reminded her of Connor's lifeless face. Focus, she told herself. Tomorrow night, hesitation will get you killed. She threw herself into the training with renewed intensity, her body remembering the rhythm of combat. Sweat beaded on her skin despite the cool morning air, and her breathing settled into the deep, controlled pattern that had once carried her through 43 victories. A branch snapped outside. Kira froze mid-strike, every sense straining. The forest was never completely silent, but something about that sound was wrong. Too heavy to be a rabbit, too deliberate to be a deer. Someone was watching. She forced herself to continue training, but now her movements were calculated for a different purpose. If someone was out there, she wanted them to see an Omega struggling with basic self-defense, not a trained killer warming up for battle. She stumbled deliberately during a simple combination, catching herself with obvious effort. Let out a frustrated grunt that echoed through the empty mill. To any observer, she would look like exactly what she was supposed to be, a desperate Omega trying to learn enough to survive tomorrow night's challenge. The presence outside remained for another 10 minutes before finally moving away. Kira waited until she was certain she was alone again, then sank to the concrete floor with shaking hands. Someone had found her sanctuary. The question was who, and what they intended to do with the information. Dominic stood in his office, staring at the stack of reports scattered across his mahogany desk. Personnel files, birth records, employment histories, everything the pack kept on its members. Somewhere in this mountain of paperwork was the truth about Kira, but so far, he'd found nothing but questions. No family records beyond a deceased father named Thomas. No education history. No former pack affiliations. It was as if she'd materialized out of thin air 2 years ago with nothing but a tragic story and a willingness to scrub floors. Alpha King. Dominic looked up to find Garrett standing in his doorway, holding a steaming cup of coffee. The advisor's face was carefully neutral, but Dominic caught the slight tension around his eyes. Come in. Dominic gestured to the chair across from his desk. I was hoping you might have insights about our mysterious Omega. Garrett settled into the chair, setting his coffee aside with deliberate care. I've been thinking about that myself. Her behavior yesterday was unusual. Unusual is putting it mildly. That throw she used on Reed was professional grade. Military precision. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying Garrett's face. Where does an Omega learn combat techniques like that? Perhaps she wasn't always an Omega. Garrett's voice was carefully modulated, but something flickered in his eyes. Pack rankings can change, especially for wolves who've experienced trauma. You think she was demoted? It's possible. Or perhaps she came from a pack with different traditions. Some of the Eastern territories are less rigid about rank structure. Dominic nodded slowly, but something about Garrett's explanation felt incomplete. The advisor was holding something back. Dominic could sense it in the careful way he chose his words. I want her background investigated thoroughly, Dominic said. Contact the Eastern Packs, cross-reference her description with missing persons reports. Someone somewhere knows who she really is. Of course, Alpha King. I'll handle it personally. Garrett rose to leave, but Dominic's voice stopped him at the door. One more thing. I want her watched. Discreetly. If she's hiding something dangerous, I need to know before tomorrow night. Naturally. I'll assign some of our best scouts to keep an eye on her. After Garrett left, Dominic returned to the files, but his mind kept wandering to Kira. The way she'd moved yesterday had been burned into his memory. Fluid, precise, deadly. But it was more than just her fighting ability that intrigued him. It was the fire in her eyes when she'd accepted his challenge. The defiance that had flickered beneath her submissive facade. For just a moment, he'd seen the real woman beneath the Omega mask, and she'd been magnificent. Dangerous, his wolf whispered. She's dangerous. Maybe. But danger had always attracted him. Kira returned to the pack house as the sun crested the horizon, slipping through the service entrance like a ghost. She'd made it halfway to the Omega quarters when a familiar voice stopped her cold. Early morning run? She turned to find Dominic leaning against the wall, fully dressed despite the early hour. His dark eyes tracked over her appearance, noting the sheen of sweat on her skin and the way her chest rose and fell with controlled breathing. I couldn't sleep, she said carefully. Thought some fresh air might help. Nervous about tonight? The question was casual, but she heard the steel beneath it. He was fishing, looking for cracks in her story. Terrified, she admitted, which was at least partially true. Dominic pushed off from the wall and moved closer, close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and winter storms, with an undertone of predator that made her wolf prick its ears. You don't move like a terrified Omega, he said quietly. What do you mean? I mean you carry yourself like a warrior. Even now, standing here in your cleaning clothes, you're balanced on the balls of your feet, ready to fight or flee in an instant. His eyes narrowed. Where did you learn that, Kira? The way he said her name sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. There was something hypnotic about his voice, something that made her want to step closer instead of backing away. My father taught me to be ready for anything, she said. Your father? Dominic circled her slowly, like a predator studying prey. Tell me about him. Kira kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, fighting the urge to track his movement. He died when I was 17. Rogue attack. And your mother? Died in childbirth. Tragic. His voice held no sympathy. So you were alone at 17, with nothing but the fighting skills your father taught you for protection. Yes. Convenient. The word hit her like a slap. She turned to face him, anger flaring before she could stop it. Convenient. A tragic backstory with no witnesses. Combat training that can't be verified. A past that's remarkably difficult to investigate. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Either you're the unluckiest wolf alive, or you're lying through your teeth. Why would I lie? That's what I intend to find out. They stared at each other in the growing daylight, the air between them crackling with tension. Kira could feel her wolf responding to his proximity, to the raw dominance that rolled off him in waves. It was primal and unwelcome, this pull she felt toward her tormentor. You're afraid of me, Dominic said suddenly. I'm not afraid of you. No. He reached out and traced one finger along her jaw, the touch light as a feather but searing hot. Then why is your pulse racing? Kira jerked away from his touch, her skin burning where he'd made contact. Because you're standing too close. Am I? He smiled, and it was pure predator. Interesting. Most Omegas would have submitted by now. Bared their throats and begged for mercy. I'm not most Omegas. No, he agreed quietly. You're not. The question is, what are you? Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Fletcher appeared around the corner, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the scene. "Alpha King," he said with a slight bow. "Garrett sent me to find you. There's been a development in the investigation." Dominic's attention shifted to his subordinate, but his body remained angled toward Kira. "What kind of development?" "The kind that requires privacy." Dominic nodded slowly, then turned back to Kira. "We'll continue this conversation later." It wasn't a request. As he walked away with Fletcher, Kira sagged against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The encounter had been a battle of wills disguised as casual conversation, and she wasn't sure who had won. But one thing was certain: Dominic suspected more than he was letting on. And if Garrett was involved in the investigation, it was only a matter of time before her carefully constructed identity came crashing down. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the packed grounds, Kira found herself drawn back to the abandoned mill. She told herself it was for training, to prepare for tomorrow night's fight, but deep down she knew the truth. She needed to feel strong again. Needed to remember who she was beneath the Omega mask. The mill was empty, silent except for the whisper of wind through broken windows. Kira moved to her usual training spot and began to warm up, her movements slow and controlled. She was halfway through a complex kata when she sensed him. Dominic stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, his massive frame silhouetted against the dying light. He'd found her sanctuary, her one safe place, and now even that was compromised. "Impressive," he said, stepping into the mill proper. "Though I have to admit I expected something more Omega-like." Kira straightened slowly, abandoning any pretense of weakness. There was no point now, he'd seen too much. "How long have you been watching?" "Long enough." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Long enough to know that everything you've told me is a lie." "Not everything." "No." "Then tell me the truth. Tell me who you really are." The words hung between them like a challenge. Kira studied his face, looking for some hint of his intentions. Was this a trap? A test? Or was he genuinely curious about the woman behind the mask? "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said finally. "Try me." For a moment she was tempted. The weight of her secrets felt crushing, and the idea of sharing them with someone, even her enemy, was almost irresistible. But then she remembered Connor's face, remembered the look of betrayal in Garrett's eyes, and the moment passed. "Some truths are too dangerous to speak," she said. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then smiled. It was a different smile than she'd seen before, not predatory or mocking, but almost appreciative. "Then I suppose I'll have to earn the right to hear them." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only when he reached the threshold. "Tomorrow night," he said without looking back, "I expect you to fight like the warrior you really are. Don't disappoint me, Kira. I hate being bored." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with her secrets and the growing certainty that tomorrow night would change everything, whether she survived it or not. Chapter 5. The full moon hung like a silver coin in the cloudless sky, casting ethereal light over the ancient stone circle that served as the pack's fighting ring. Hundreds of wolves had gathered for what they expected to be a spectacle. The swift and brutal execution of an upstart Omega who'd forgotten her place. Kira stood at the edge of the circle, her hands steady despite the chaos of emotions churning in her chest. She'd stripped down to fitted black leggings and a sports bra, her Omega disguise finally abandoned. Without the shapeless cleaning clothes and hunched posture, her true form was revealed. Lean muscle over a deceptively powerful frame, every line speaking of controlled violence. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as they took in her transformation. This wasn't the broken Omega who scrubbed their floors. This was something else entirely. "Well, well," Beta James called out from the front row, his voice carrying easily over the gathering. "Looks like our little mouse has been hiding some claws." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was nervous now, uncertain. A few of the older wolves studied Kira with newfound interest, recognizing something familiar in her stance. Across the ring, Dominic was stripping off his shirt, revealing the kind of physique that had made him Alpha King. His chest was a map of old scars, testament to battles won and challenges survived. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of pure muscle, he was built like a weapon. But as he caught sight of Kira's transformation, his confident smirk faltered slightly. "Impressive," he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the stone circle. "Though I have to wonder, if you've been hiding this body, what else have you been hiding?" Kira didn't respond. She was centering herself, falling into the mental space she'd occupied 43 times before. The crowd, the stakes, even Dominic himself. All of it faded until there was only the ring and the fight to come. Elder Morrison, the pack's ceremonial leader, stepped forward with the ancient speaking staff. His voice boomed across the gathering as he recited the formal challenge terms. By moon and blood, by fang and claw, we witness this trial of combat. Victory to Kira means elevation to beta rank and full recognition within the pack hierarchy. Victory to Alpha King Dominic means exile for the challenger, never to return to these lands. He paused, his ancient eyes moving between the two fighters. This is trial by combat, no weapons, no outside interference. The fight ends with submission, unconsciousness, or... He hesitated, glancing at Dominic. Death. A collective intake of breath from the crowd. Death matches were rare in modern pack politics, reserved for only the most serious challenges to alpha authority. Are both parties willing to accept these terms? I accept, Dominic said immediately, rolling his shoulders in preparation. All eyes turned to Kira. This was her last chance to back down, to accept exile, and disappear into the wilderness. It would be safer, smarter. But Meredith was in the crowd, watching with worried eyes. And Connor Blackwood was still dead, his father's grief still demanding justice. Running wouldn't change any of that. I accept, she said clearly. Elder Morrison raised the staff high. Then let combat begin. The crowd erupted as Dominic launched himself across the ring with supernatural speed. He was fast, faster than she'd expected. But Kira had been watching him for days, cataloging his movements, his preferred angles of attack. She sidestepped his charge by inches, her hand shooting out to catch his extended arm. Before he could react, she used his own momentum to send him stumbling past her, off balance and exposed. The crowd's cheers faltered into confused murmurs. That hadn't looked like luck. Dominic recovered quickly, spinning to face her with new respect in his eyes. Not bad. But you'll need more than fancy footwork to. Kira moved. She flowed forward like liquid lightning, her strikes precise and devastating. A jab toward his solar plexus that he barely blocked, followed immediately by a knee strike that would have ended the fight if it had connected. Dominic backpedaled, his eyes wide with shock. This wasn't an Omega trying to get lucky. This was a master at work. What the hell? He started to say, but Kira was already inside his guard, her elbow driving toward his ribs with bone-crushing force. Dominic twisted desperately, the blow glancing off his side instead of landing cleanly. But even the partial hit staggered him, and suddenly he was fighting for his life instead of putting on a show. The crowd had gone completely silent, watching in stunned disbelief as their Alpha King, undefeated in 7 years of challenges, found himself on the defensive against a supposed Omega. Kira pressed her advantage ruthlessly. Her fighting style was a thing of beauty and terror. Technical precision mixed with brutal efficiency, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. She fought like someone who had never lost, because she never had. Dominic managed to land a solid backhand that snapped her head to the side, but she rolled with the impact and came back with a spinning kick that nearly took his head off. He ducked at the last second, the wind from her foot ruffling his hair. "Who are you?" he gasped, circling her warily. Instead of answering, Kira shifted. The transformation was flawless. One moment she was human, the next a black wolf with silver markings that seemed to glow in the moonlight. But unlike most wolves who lost some control in their shifted form, she moved with the same liquid precision, the same calculated violence. Dominic shifted to match her, his own wolf massive and intimidating. In wolf form, he had at least 40 pounds on her, but size meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit. They clashed in the center of the ring, supernatural strength meeting supernatural speed. Dominic's wolf was powerful, dominant, built for crushing opponents through sheer force. But Kira fought like smoke and shadow, impossible to pin down, always one step ahead of his attacks. She ducked under his lunge and raked her claws across his flank, drawing blood. The crowd gasped. First blood had been drawn, and it wasn't the Omegas. Dominic snarled and spun, snapping at her throat, but she was already gone, circling behind him with predatory grace. Her tactics were textbook: stay mobile, strike fast, never commit to exchanges where his superior size could come into play. But as the fight continued, something else became clear. Kira wasn't just skilled, she was holding back. Every strike could have been deeper, every combination more devastating. She was fighting to win without doing permanent damage, and the restraint was starting to show. Dominic sensed it too. His wolf's confidence began to return as he realized she wasn't trying to kill him. He pressed forward more aggressively, accepting minor wounds in exchange for opportunities to grapple. When he finally managed to get his jaws around her hind leg, the crowd thought the fight was over. His bite should have crippled her, should have ended the match in his favor. Instead, Kira did something that shouldn't have been possible. She twisted in his grip, her flexibility inhuman even by wolf standards, and sank her fangs into the nerve cluster at the base of his skull. It was a precision strike that required intimate knowledge of wolf anatomy, and it paralyzed him instantly. Dominic collapsed to the stone floor, his massive body convulsing as his nervous system misfired. Kira stood over him, her wolf form magnificent and terrible in the moonlight, her fangs still bared. The crowd was dead silent. Even Elder Morrison looked stunned. In the front row, Garrett was staring at Kira with recognition dawning in his eyes. That fighting style, those precise strikes, the way she moved like death incarnate, he'd seen it all before. "Shadow," he whispered. The name carried on the still air, and several wolves turned to look at him in confusion. But Garrett wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the black wolf standing over their defeated Alpha King, and his face was twisted with grief and rage. "You're the Shadow," he said louder, his voice cracking with emotion. "The fighter who killed my son." Kira's wolf form went perfectly still. Around the ring, confused murmurs began to rise as pack members tried to process what they were hearing. "Connor," Garrett continued, his voice growing stronger. "Connor Blackwood. You killed him in the Crimson Cage 2 years ago." The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Most of them remembered Connor, Garrett's only son, bright and promising until he'd vanished into the underground fighting world. They'd been told he died in an accident, but the pain in Garrett's voice suggested something more deliberate. Kira shifted back to human form, her naked skin gleaming with sweat and blood in the moonlight. She stood over Dominic, who was slowly regaining feeling in his limbs, and for the first time since the fight began, she looked uncertain. "It was an accident," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the silence. "An accident?" Garrett laughed bitterly. "You were a professional killer." He was a boy desperate to save his sister. "You could have pulled back, could have shown mercy, but you didn't." "I tried." "You tried nothing." Garrett's control finally shattered, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the circle. "You saw easy money and you took it, consequences be damned." The crowd was buzzing now, pieces clicking into place. The mysterious Omega with no history. The impossible fighting skills. The way she dominated their Alpha King like it was routine. She was the Shadow, the most feared fighter in the underground supernatural world. The wolf who had never lost a match. Until she'd killed Connor Blackwood and vanished. Below her, Dominic had recovered enough to speak. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the nerve strike. Kira looked down at him. This man who had tormented her, challenged her, forced her out of hiding. He was at her complete mercy, paralyzed and helpless, and she had the power to end his life with a single strike. Just like she'd had the power to pull back with Connor. "Yes," she whispered. "It's true." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the ring, wolves who had watched her clean their floors for 2 years stared in shock and growing fear. She wasn't just a hidden warrior, she was a killer. Dominic's eyes never left her face. "Finish it then." The command was simple, direct. By the rules of combat, she had won. She could claim victory and accept her elevation to beta rank. Or she could do what everyone expected. Kill the Alpha King who had humiliated her and take his place at the top of the pack hierarchy. Her hands flexed at her sides, muscle memory guiding her toward the killing strike. It would be easy, a quick blow to the temple, precise and clean. Dominic would be dead before he felt pain. But as she raised her hand, Connor's face flashed in her memory. Young, desperate, dying on a canvas floor while a crowd screamed around him. She couldn't do it again. Kira stepped back, her hands falling to her sides. "I forfeit." The words shocked everyone, including herself. Around the ring, wolves leaned forward in confusion. "What?" Elder Morrison stepped forward, his ancient voice uncertain. "You forfeit victory?" "I forfeit everything." Kira looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of wolves who had known her as nothing more than a servant. "I am the Shadow. I did kill Connor Blackwood. And I accept exile as punishment for deceiving this pack." "No." Dominic's voice was stronger now, the paralysis fading. He pushed himself up to his knees, then to his feet, swaying but determined. "You won. By right of combat, you earned your victory. I don't want it. That's not how this works." He faced her across the ring, both of them bloodied and exhausted. "You exposed me, defeated me, showed mercy when you could have killed me. That's not the action of a monster. It's the action of a leader. Garrett stepped into the ring, his face twisted with grief and rage. She's a murderer. She killed my son. In a legal fight, Dominic said quietly. In a world where death was always a possibility. He was just a boy. He was a fighter who chose to step into that ring. Dominic's voice was firm but not unkind. Your grief is understandable, Garrett, but it doesn't change the law. The advisor stared at both of them, his hands shaking with fury. This isn't over, he said finally. Murder demands justice, even if you're too blinded by lust to see it. He stalked out of the ring, pushing through the crowd. Several wolves followed him, their expressions troubled. In the silence that followed, Elder Morrison cleared his throat. By right of combat, victory goes to Kira. As challenged, she is elevated to beta rank, with all the rights and responsibilities thereof. The crowd began to disperse, their voices rising in excited chatter. They'd witnessed history tonight. The rise of a new beta, the revelation of the Shadow's identity, and the mercy that had saved their alpha's life. But as wolves filed out of the stone circle, Kira remained standing in the center, staring at her hands. She'd won everything she'd supposedly fought for, but it felt hollow. She was no longer invisible, no longer safe. And somewhere in the dispersing crowd, Garrett was already planning his revenge. Chapter 6. The Great Hall had been transformed into a tribunal. Pack members filled every available space, their voices rising in heated debate as they argued over what they'd witnessed in the fighting ring. Word had spread like wildfire. Their humble Omega was the Shadow, the most feared fighter in the underground supernatural world. And she had killed Garrett's son. Kira sat in the center of the chaos, flanked by 2 guards that Dominic had insisted on for her protection. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was probably the most dangerous person in the room, yet she was the one under guard. Across the hall, Garrett stood before a growing crowd of supporters, his voice carrying over the din as he recounted his son's death in vivid, painful detail. Connor was 20 years old, he said, his voice breaking with manufactured grief. Barely more than a boy when this killer took his life for sport. It wasn't sport, Kira said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. It was a sanctioned fight. Legal under underground rules. Legal? Garrett's laugh was bitter and theatrical. You call murder legal? I call it an accident. Kira stood slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. One I've regretted every day for 2 years. Beta James stepped forward from the crowd, his expression cold. Regret doesn't bring back the dead. Pack law is clear. A member's death demands blood justice. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Kira recognized some of the voices. Wolves she'd served meals to, whose floors she'd scrubbed, who had never bothered to learn her name when she was invisible. Now they bayed for her blood with righteous fury. The underground fights are illegal, called out Marcus, one of the younger pack warriors. Anyone who participates does so at their own risk. Connor knew the dangers. He was desperate. Garrett's voice rose to near hysteria. His sister was dying, and the medical bills were crushing our family. He only fought to save her life. The sympathy in the crowd was palpable now. Connor wasn't just a victim. He was a tragic hero, a young wolf who died trying to save his family. Kira felt the narrative slipping away from her, truth being buried under emotion and manipulation. But she had to try. The fight was fixed, she said clearly. The hall fell silent. Garrett's face went pale, then flushed red with fury. How dare you? The promoters drugged Connor with rage enhancers, Kira continued, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. I didn't know until it was too late. He was supposed to lose in the 3rd round, but the drugs made him impossible to stop without lethal force. Lies! Garrett's voice cracked like a whip. Desperate lies from a killer trying to save her own life. But Dominic was studying Kira's face with the intense focus of a predator. You have proof of this? I did. Medical records, toxicology reports, communications between the promoters. Kira's hands clenched at her sides. Everything burned when I torched the crimson cage before I ran. How convenient, James sneered. The only evidence conveniently destroyed. Not the only evidence. Kira's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. Garrett was there that night. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye turned to the grieving father, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. Garrett started then stopped. Of course I was there. I was trying to talk Connor out of fighting. You were in the promoter's office, Kira said quietly. I saw you. 2 hours before the fight, arguing with Marcus Volkov about payment. Marcus, the name sent a ripple of recognition through the older wolves. Volkov was notorious in underground circles, a promoter who specialized in fixed fights and corrupted matches. That's impossible, Garrett said, but his voice lacked conviction now. I would never. You would. Kira took a step forward, and the guards moved with her. Because the shadow was worth more dead than alive. The bounty on my head was $50,000, enough to pay for Connor's sister's treatment and still have money left over. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Around the hall, pack members began to whisper, pieces clicking into place. You're insane, Garrett breathed. You think I would sacrifice my own son? I think you were desperate. Just like Connor. Kira's voice was soft but merciless. I think you made a deal with Volkov. Connor would be drugged and would lose control. I would be forced to kill him in self-defense. And you would collect the bounty while playing the grieving father. This is madness. Garrett appealed to the crowd. She's trying to shift blame for her crimes. But doubt was spreading through the pack like wildfire. Garrett's financial troubles had been common knowledge 2 years ago. His sudden solvency after Connor's death had raised questions that were quickly buried under grief. Dominic stepped into the center of the hall, his presence commanding immediate attention. Garrett, he said quietly, where did you get the money for Connor's sister's treatment? Insurance, Garrett said quickly. Connor had a policy. The insurance company denied the claim, Dominic interrupted. I remember because you asked me to intervene on your behalf. They said the death occurred during illegal activity. Garrett's face was ashen now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. There were other sources. $50,000 in cash, Kira said relentlessly. Delivered to your home 3 days after Connor's funeral. I had Volkov's operation under surveillance before I disappeared. I know because I was planning to expose the whole thing. You have no proof. Garrett's composure finally cracked completely. You burned everything, remember? Convenient excuse for a murderer. Not everything. Kira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. Audio recorder. Military grade, designed to survive fire and explosion. I wore it to every fight. The tiny device seemed to pulse with malevolent energy in the sudden silence. It's all there, Kira continued. Your conversation with Volkov. The details of the fix. Your agreement to drug your own son in exchange for my bounty. Garrett stared at the recorder like it was a venomous snake. That could be faked. Manufactured evidence. Play it, Dominic commanded. Kira looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of wolves who had judged her, condemned her, demanded her blood. Are you sure? Once you hear this, you can't unhear it. Play it, he repeated. Kira activated the device. The audio quality was crystal clear, voices emerging from 2 years in the past with startling clarity. Don't care about your family problems, Garrett. The shadow is worth more to me dead than your boy is alive. He's my son, Volkov. There has to be another way. There is no other way. She's too good, too careful. This is the only chance we'll get to take her down. The drugs, they're dangerous. Connor could die. That's the point. She kills him, we get the bounty, and you get enough money to save your daughter and set yourself up for life. Everyone wins. Everyone except Connor. Connor's dead already, just like your daughter. At least this way, his death means something. A long pause, then Garrett's voice, barely a whisper. How much? The recording clicked off, leaving the hall in absolute silence. Garrett stood in the center of it all, his face a mask of grief and guilt and desperate rage. Around him, pack members stared in horror and disgust. It's fake, he said weakly. She manufactured it to save herself. But no one was listening anymore. The truth was written on his face, in the way his shoulders sagged, in the tears that streamed down his cheeks. You killed him, someone whispered from the crowd. You killed your own son. I was trying to save Emma. Garrett's composure shattered completely. She was dying. The treatments cost more than I could ever make. I thought Connor would just lose the fight. The drugs were supposed to make him sloppy, not. He broke off, realizing he'd just confessed to everything. The crowd erupted in chaos. Voices rose in anger and disgust, wolves pushing forward with violent intent. Garrett had violated the most sacred trust in pack culture. The protection of family. Enough! Dominic's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The alpha command in it forced every wolf in the hall to freeze. In the sudden quiet, he walked slowly toward Garrett, who cowered back against the wall. You fixed the fight, Dominic said quietly. You drugged your own son. You orchestrated his death for money. I never meant for him to die, Garrett whispered. It was supposed to be different. But you let Kira carry the guilt for 2 years. You watched her torture herself over an accident you caused. Dominic's voice was getting softer, more dangerous. You demanded blood justice for a crime you committed. Garrett fell to his knees, broken and sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Sorry doesn't resurrect the dead. Dominic turned to face the crowd. Pack law is clear. The penalty for filicide is death. The word hit like a thunderclap. Filicide, the murder of one's own child, was the most heinous crime in werewolf culture. Please, Garrett begged, reaching for Dominic's legs. Please, Emma, my daughter, she's all I have left. You should have thought of that before you sacrificed Connor. Dominic's voice was merciless. Beta James, escort Garrett to the detention cells. He'll be executed at dawn. As James and 2 other wolves dragged the sobbing Garrett away, Dominic turned to face Kira. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 years of guilt and self-hatred. It seems, he said quietly, that I owe you an apology. Kira shook her head slowly. Connor is still dead. That hasn't changed. But the guilt isn't yours to carry anymore. She looked at him. This man who had tormented her, challenged her, forced her into revealing truths she'd buried deep. His dark eyes held something she'd never seen before. Respect. Maybe even more than respect. What happens now? She asked. Now! Dominic glanced around the hall, at the pack members who were still processing what they'd learned. Now you take your place as Beta. Lead these wolves. Help me rebuild what Garrett's corruption has damaged. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dominic's smile was slow and dangerous and full of promise. That remains to be seen. But I have a feeling things are about to get very interesting. Around them, the pack began to disperse, voices rising in animated discussion. The truth was out now, all of it. Kira was no longer the shadow, the mysterious killer hiding in plain sight. She was Beta Kira, second in command of one of the most powerful packs in the territory. And for the first time in 2 years, the weight of guilt was lifting from her shoulders. But as she watched Dominic address the remaining pack members, organizing the aftermath of Garrett's betrayal, she couldn't shake the feeling that her trials were far from over. She'd survived the revelation of her past. Now she had to learn to live with the consequences of her future. Chapter 7. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence like thunder. Kira jolted awake in her new Beta quarters as the windows rattled in their frames. The acrid smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air, followed immediately by the metallic scent of blood and the sharp musk of wolves in battle fury. She was moving before her mind fully processed the threat, rolling out of bed and grabbing the weapons she'd hidden under her mattress, a pair of silver-edged knives she'd kept from her shadow days. Outside, howls of rage and pain echoed across the pack grounds. The pack house was under attack. Kira threw on clothes and burst from her room to find chaos in the hallways. Pack members ran in every direction, some fleeing toward the safe rooms, others racing toward the sounds of battle. Through a shattered window, she could see flames consuming the eastern wing of the building. Kira! Meredith appeared at her elbow, the elderly Omega's face pale with terror. Thank the moon you're safe. They came out of nowhere. Who? Kira grabbed the old woman's shoulders. Who attacked us? Garrett's people. At least 30 of them, maybe more. They freed him from the detention cells and... A wolf's snarl cut through the air behind them. Kira spun to see Trevor, one of Garrett's most vocal supporters, advancing down the hallway with 2 other males she didn't recognize. Their eyes glowed with the amber fire of wolves on the edge of shifting, and their scents carried the bitter tang of stimulants. Well, well. Trevor's voice was slurred slightly, confirming Kira's suspicion about the drugs. The famous shadow, cornered like a rat. Get behind me, Kira told Meredith quietly, then raised her voice to address Trevor. You're making a mistake. Garrett used you all. Garrett opened our eyes. Trevor's companion, a scarred wolf named Vincent, stepped forward with a machete in his hands. Showed us how weak Dominic's become, how corrupt this pack is under his leadership. By murdering his own son? By doing what was necessary. Trevor was fully shifted now, his wolf form massive and drug-enhanced. Just like we're going to do what's necessary with you. They attacked in perfect coordination, a flanking maneuver designed to overwhelm a single opponent. It might have worked against anyone else. Kira moved like liquid death. She threw one knife in a perfect arc that took Vincent in the throat before he could bring his machete to bear. The second blade found the heart of the third attacker before he'd taken 2 steps. Trevor's enhanced reflexes let him dodge her initial strike, but drug-induced speed was no match for years of professional training. She caught his shifted form in mid-leap, using his own momentum to slam him into the stone wall hard enough to crack bone. He dropped like a stone and didn't get up. The entire fight lasted less than 10 seconds. "Merciful moon," Meredith whispered. "You really are." "I'm what I've always been," Kira said grimly, retrieving her knives. "The question is whether that's enough." More explosions rocked the building, closer this time. Through the smoke and chaos, she could hear Dominic's voice roaring commands, trying to organize a defense. But from the sounds of battle, they were badly outnumbered. "Meredith, get to the safe rooms. Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone except me or Dominic." "What about you?" Kira checked her weapons and gave the elderly Omega a grim smile. "I'm going to do what I do best." She left Meredith and raced toward the sounds of heaviest fighting. The main courtyard was a war zone. Wolves in shifted and human form battling with desperate fury while the pack house burned around them. Bodies littered the ground, and the air was thick with blood and smoke. In the center of it all, Dominic fought like the warrior king he was. His massive wolf form dominated the battlefield, coordinating his pack's defense while tearing through enemies with savage efficiency. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once, and Garrett's forces were pushing in from multiple directions. Kira spotted the true threat immediately. A sniper's nest had been set up in the bell tower of the old chapel, giving Garrett's people high ground and clear shots at Dominic's position. 3 wolves with military-grade rifles were systematically picking off pack defenders. Without hesitation, Kira sprinted across the courtyard, using burning debris and fallen bodies for cover. A bullet sparked off the stone inches from her head, but she didn't slow down. She reached the chapel's side entrance and flowed inside like a shadow. The interior was dark and filled with smoke, but her enhanced senses guided her to the narrow stairs leading to the bell tower. She climbed in perfect silence, her knife ready in her hand. The first sniper never knew she was there. The blade slid between his ribs with surgical precision, piercing his heart before he could cry out. The second one turned at his partner's death rattle, but Kira was already moving, her hand clamping over his mouth while her knife found his throat. The third sniper spun around with his rifle raised, but Kira was inside his guard before he could fire. She broke his arm with a sharp twist, then used his own weapon to put him down permanently. From the tower window, she had a perfect view of the battle below. Dominic's forces were holding, but barely. More of Garrett's wolves were pouring in from the forest, and these newcomers moved with military precision that spoke of extensive training. Kira keyed her radio, a precaution Dominic had insisted all pack leaders carry. "Alpha, this is Beta Kira. I've got eyes on your position from the chapel tower." Dominic's voice crackled back, strained with effort. "Kira, thank God. What's your assessment?" "We're outnumbered 3-1, and they're using professional tactics. This isn't a spontaneous uprising, it's a coordinated military assault." "How long have they been planning this?" "Months, maybe years." Kira studied the enemy positions, her tactical mind cataloging threats and opportunities. Garrett's been building this faction for a long time. He's got resources, weapons, and wolves who've been trained for urban warfare. A new explosion rocked the chapel, and Kira saw smoke rising from the Omega quarters. Her blood turned to ice as she realized the implications. "They're targeting non-combatants," she said into the radio. "Dominic, they're going after the children and elderly." The rage in his response was palpable. "Sons of bitches. Can you get to them?" "Negative. Too many hostiles between me and the quarters." Kira's mind raced through possibilities. "But I can thin their numbers from here." She appropriated one of the sniper rifles and settled into position. Through the scope, she could see individual faces of Garrett's forces, wolves she'd served meals to, whose children she'd helped care for. The betrayal cut deep, but not deep enough to stay her hand. Her first shot took down the wolf, directing the assault on the Omega quarters. Her second dropped the communications specialist coordinating enemy movements. Each kill was precise, professional, and utterly without mercy. "Unknown sniper." Dominic's voice carried across the battlefield. "Friendly fire on Overwatch position." Kira smiled grimly. "Not unknown, Alpha. Just getting reacquainted with old skills." She continued picking off targets with mechanical precision, each shot carefully chosen for maximum tactical impact. Enemy leaders fell first, then specialists, then anyone stupid enough to expose themselves in her line of sight. But even as she thinned their numbers, more of Garrett's wolves emerged from the forest. These weren't pack members, they were mercenaries, professional soldiers hired for this specific assault. "Dominic," she said into the radio, "we've got bigger problems. Those aren't just traitorous pack members anymore. Garrett's brought in outside muscle." "How many?" "Too many." Kira watched as a squad of armed humans took position near the main gate. And they've got military hardware. This is turning into a siege. Then we need to break out before they lock us down completely. Kira studied the battlefield below, her tactical instincts analyzing every angle. I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it. I'm listening. We use my underground connections. The fighting rings weren't just about sport, they were networking opportunities. I know every supernatural mercenary, fence, and weapons dealer within 500 miles. Dominic's pause was telling. You want to call in favors from criminals? I want to even the odds. Kira's voice was steady despite the chaos around her. These people owe me, and more importantly, they respect strength. If I tell them Garrett's people are trying to muscle in on territory, they'll come running. And if they decide to take over themselves once this is finished, then we deal with that problem when we come to it. Right now, we don't have a choice. Another explosion, closer this time. Through the scope, Kira could see enemy forces beginning to surround the main building. In another hour, they'd have the pack house completely isolated. Do it, Dominic said finally. Make the call. Kira pulled out her personal phone, a device she'd hoped never to use again, and scrolled through contacts she'd thought were buried forever. Names and numbers from a life she'd tried to leave behind. The first call went to Viktor Kozlov, a Russian weapons dealer who specialized in supernatural conflicts. His gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Well, the shadow rises from the dead. I heard you were playing house with some backwater pack. Victor, I need a favor. Favors are expensive, little wolf. Especially for someone who's been retired as long as you. Remember Budapest? The Crimson Moon tournament? A pause. You saved my nephew's life that night. Pulled him out of the ring when those Hungarian bastards tried to fix the fight with poison. And now I'm calling in that debt. What do you need? Kira outlined the situation quickly, professionally. Victor listened without interruption, his breathing the only sound on the line. 30 minutes, he said finally. I've got a crew in the area. They'll come in from the South Road. The next call went to Maria Santos, a former military sniper who'd gone freelance after a dishonorable discharge. The third to Chun Wei, a demolitions expert who specialized in urban warfare. Within 20 minutes, Kira had assembled a small army of professionals, criminals and mercenaries who owed their lives or fortunes to the Shadow's intervention in past conflicts. Cavalry's coming, she told Dominic over the radio. ETA 15 minutes on the first wave. Outstanding. What's your position? Bell Tower, but I'm about to relocate. They've figured out where the sniper fire is coming from. Even as she spoke, Kira could see enemy forces moving toward the chapel. Time to go. She gathered the remaining ammunition and headed for the stairs, but stopped when she heard Garrett's voice echoing across the courtyard through a megaphone. Dominic, I know you can hear me. Kira moved to the window and saw Garrett standing on the roof of the burning eastern wing, flanked by a dozen heavily armed wolves. He looked nothing like the grieving father who'd been arrested hours earlier. This was a military commander in his element. You're finished, Garrett continued, his voice carrying clearly over the sounds of battle. Your weak leadership has brought nothing but corruption and decay to this pack. But I'm offering you one chance. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick. Dominic's response was a howl of pure rage that echoed off the surrounding buildings. His massive wolf form emerged from the smoke near the main entrance, muscles rippling with barely contained violence. Garrett laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Still the savage beast, I see. That's exactly why you're unfit to lead. You murdered your own son. Dominic's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You betrayed everything this pack stands for. I did what was necessary. Garrett's composure cracked slightly. Connor was weak, just like you. This pack needs strength, not sentiment. Then come down here and show me how strong you are. But Garrett was too smart to take the bait. Instead, he raised his rifle and took aim at Dominic's exposed position. Kira didn't think. She didn't calculate angles or consider consequences. She just moved. The sniper rifle bucked against her shoulder, and Garrett's weapon exploded in his hands as her bullet found its mark. He stumbled backward, bleeding from shrapnel wounds but still alive. This isn't over, he screamed across the courtyard. You can't protect him forever, Shadow. But Kira was already moving, racing down the chapel stairs as enemy forces converged on her position. She burst out of the side entrance just as the first of Victor's vehicles roared into the courtyard. Armored SUVs filled with professional killers who owed their lives to the Shadow. The tide of battle turned in minutes. Garrett's mercenaries were good, but Victor's people were better. They moved with the kind of fluid teamwork that only came from years of fighting together, systematically dismantling enemy positions with ruthless efficiency. Kira found herself fighting alongside Dominic for the first time, their movements complementing each other with startling precision. Where he was raw power and dominant fury, she was surgical precision and tactical awareness. Together, they carved through enemy forces like a matched pair of weapons. "Behind you!" Dominic's warning came just as an enemy wolf lunged at Kira's back. She spun and put her knife through his heart without breaking stride. "Left flank," she called back, and Dominic's massive form bounded past her to intercept 3 mercenaries trying to outflank their position. They moved like they'd been fighting together for years instead of hours, each anticipating the other's needs and weaknesses. It was partnership forged in blood and violence, trust built on shared survival. By the time the sun crested the horizon, Garrett's forces were in full retreat. The pack house was damaged but secure, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. But as Kira stood in the smoking ruins of the courtyard, surrounded by bodies and debris, she knew this was only the beginning. Garrett had escaped, along with a core group of his most fanatical followers. He'd revealed the existence of a broader conspiracy, a network of wolves who believed Dominic was too weak to lead in the modern world. The Civil War had begun in earnest, and somewhere out there, Garrett was already planning his next move. Chapter 8. 3 weeks after the rebellion, the pack house had been rebuilt stronger than before. But the real changes ran deeper than new stone and timber. They pulsed through the very heart of pack culture. Kira stood at the window of what had once been Garrett's office, watching the afternoon training session in the courtyard below. Where once there had been arbitrary divisions between ranks, now wolves of all levels trained together under her supervision. Omegas learned alongside betas, elderly pack members shared wisdom with eager young warriors, and everyone, from the strongest alpha to the newest arrival, earned their position through merit rather than birthright. The Nightfall Pack delegation arrived an hour early, Dominic said from the doorway behind her. "They're waiting in the Great Hall." Kira didn't turn around, but she could feel his presence like a warm current in the air. Over the past weeks, something fundamental had shifted between them. The antagonism was gone, replaced by a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. "Nervous?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "Should I be?" She finally looked at him, noting the way his dark eyes tracked her movements. "They're here to assess the new power structure, not declare war." "Are they?" Dominic's smile was wry. Alpha Stefan isn't known for his diplomatic nature. The fact that he's here personally instead of sending an envoy speaks volumes. Through the window, they watched as young Timothy, a former Omega who'd proven himself during the rebellion, demonstrated a complex takedown technique to a group of impressed warriors. The sight filled Kira with quiet satisfaction. "Let them assess," she said. "We have nothing to hide." "No," Dominic agreed quietly. "We don't." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Immediately after Garrett's defeat, the pack had looked to them for leadership, not just as alpha and beta, but as the mated pair everyone assumed they would become. The assumption had been so universal that neither of them had bothered to correct it. Until now. "Kira," Dominic said carefully, "about tonight. The ceremony." She turned to face him fully, noting the tension in his shoulders. Having second thoughts? The mating ceremony had been planned for weeks, a formal recognition of their partnership that would cement their joint leadership of the pack. But it was more than political theater. Somewhere between the rebellion and the rebuilding, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. "Not second thoughts," he said. "But I want to be clear about what we're doing here." "And what are we doing?" Dominic stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes. "We're not just combining our strength for political advantage. This isn't a marriage of convenience." "No," she agreed softly. "It's not. I love you." The words came out quietly, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. "I don't know when it happened, or how, but somewhere between hating you and fighting beside you, I fell completely in love with you." Kira felt her breath catch. She'd sensed his feelings, had felt her own emotions shifting and deepening, but hearing the words spoken aloud was different. "I love you too," she said simply, "which terrifies me more than any fight I've ever faced." Dominic laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Why?" "Because it makes you vulnerable. Because it makes me want things I never thought I could have." She looked out at the training wolves again, at the pack that had become her family. "A home. A future. The right to protect something precious. You have all of that." "Do I?" She turned back to him, her expression serious. This ceremony tonight, it's not just about us. The other packs are watching, weighing our strength, deciding whether to ally with us or destroy us before we become too powerful. Then we show them exactly how powerful we are. A knock on the door interrupted them. Fletcher entered with a slight bow, his expression carefully neutral. Alpha King, Alpha Queen, he said formally. The Nightfall Pack delegation is requesting an immediate audience. Kira raised an eyebrow at the title he'd used for her. Technically, she wouldn't be Alpha Queen until after the ceremony, but the pack had already begun treating her as such. Very well, Dominic said. We'll meet them in the Great Hall. As they walked through the corridors, pack members they passed bowed respectfully to both of them. The deference wasn't forced or fearful. It was genuine respect earned through blood and sacrifice. The Great Hall had been transformed for the evening's ceremony, with flowers and ceremonial banners adorning the walls. But now it served as a meeting space for high-stakes diplomacy. Alpha Stefan of the Nightfall Pack stood near the center of the room, flanked by his beta, and two other wolves Kira didn't recognize. Stefan was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. His pack controlled territory to the north, and their alliance would be valuable. Their enmity would be dangerous. Alpha Stefan, Dominic said as they approached. Welcome to our territory. Dominic. Stefan's voice was carefully neutral. Congratulations on surviving your little civil war. Thank you. Though I suspect you're here for more than congratulations. Stefan's smile was sharp as a blade. Indeed. I'm here to assess the rumors about your new partnership. His eyes moved to Kira, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. The first real test of how other alphas would receive her elevation. You must be the famous Shadow, Stefan continued. Though I understand you prefer Beta Kira these days. I prefer whatever title serves the pack best, Kira replied evenly. How diplomatic. And tonight you'll become Alpha Queen. Tonight, I'll accept the responsibility of joint leadership. Stefan circled them slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Joint leadership. An interesting concept. Tell me, how does one divide ultimate authority? The same way one doubles ultimate strength, Dominic said quietly. Pretty words. But I've heard disturbing reports about the changes you're implementing. Omega's training with warriors? Merit-based advancement? These innovations could destabilize the entire regional hierarchy. Kira stepped forward slightly, her posture calm but ready. Change is inevitable, Alpha Stefan. The question is whether we guide it or let it destroy us. And you believe your way is better? I believe our way works. She gestured toward the windows overlooking the training grounds. 3 weeks ago, this pack was nearly destroyed by internal corruption. Today, we're stronger than we've been in decades. Because you eliminated the corruption through violence. Because we replaced corruption with merit. Kira's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. Every wolf in this pack knows their worth is determined by their actions, not their bloodline. Stefan's beta, a lean wolf named Harrison, stepped forward. And what happens when other packs refuse to recognize these innovations? The threat was subtle but clear. Kira felt Dominic tense beside her, but she remained relaxed. Then those packs will find themselves at a disadvantage, she said simply. Progress doesn't wait for permission. Stefan studied her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed. By the moon, you really are everything the rumors claimed. No wonder Garrett couldn't break you. The tension in the room shifted subtly. Stefan's laughter had genuine appreciation in it, not mockery. I came here expecting to find a power-hungry female using her mate for advancement, he continued. Instead, I find a warrior who's willing to revolutionize pack culture for the greater good. And what's your assessment? Dominic asked carefully. My assessment is that the Nightfall Pack would be honored to call you allies. Stefan extended his hand to Dominic, then to Kira. Your innovations intrigue me. Perhaps it's time my own pack considered some changes. The alliance negotiations that followed were surprisingly smooth. Stefan was genuinely interested in the training programs Kira had developed, particularly the integration of different ranks and the emphasis on practical skills over ceremonial knowledge. By the time the delegation left, 3 other neighboring packs had sent messengers requesting similar meetings. Word was spreading quickly about the changes in Dominic's territory. Well, Dominic said as they watched Stefan's convoy disappear into the forest, that went better than expected. The first one always does, Kira replied. It's the others who'll be problematic. Others? The traditionalist packs. The ones who see our reforms as a threat to their own power structures. She turned to face him. Stefan was right about one thing. we're destabilizing the regional hierarchy. Some alphas won't appreciate that. Then we'll deal with them when the time comes. Together? Always together. That evening, as the sun set over the pack lands, the ceremony began. The entire pack had gathered in the Great Hall, along with delegations from allied territories. Elder Morrison stood at the center of the room with the ceremonial chalice, his ancient voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "We gather tonight to witness the joining of two warriors," he intoned. "Two leaders who have proven their worth in blood and battle, who have earned the right to guide this pack into the future." Kira wore a gown of deep midnight blue, simple but elegant, that allowed for easy movement. She'd insisted on that. Even at her own mating ceremony, she wanted to be ready for anything. Dominic stood beside her in ceremonial black, his presence commanding but warm. When their eyes met, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "Do you, Dominic Blackthorn, Alpha King of this pack, take Kira as your mate and equal partner in leadership?" "I do," Dominic said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "In strength and in weakness, in victory and in defeat, I choose her as my mate and my queen." "And do you, Kira, accept the responsibility of Alpha Queen, to lead this pack beside your mate with wisdom and strength?" "I do," she replied clearly. "I swear to protect the innocent, to lead with justice, and to build a future worthy of those who place their trust in us." Elder Morrison smiled and raised the ceremonial chalice. "Then by moon and blood, by fang and claw, I pronounce you mated before pack and witness. May your union bring strength to this territory and all who call it home." The crowd erupted in cheers as Dominic and Kira sealed their bond with a kiss that was both tender and fierce. But as they broke apart, Kira's enhanced hearing caught something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the forest. Many footsteps moving with military precision. She caught Dominic's eye and saw her own realization reflected there. The ceremony had been the perfect distraction. Every important pack member gathered in one place, their attention focused inward instead of on perimeter security. "How many?" he asked quietly, his lips barely moving. Kira listened carefully, cataloging the sounds only she could hear. 50, maybe 60. Multiple vectors of approach. "Garrett. Has to be. This is his style. Strike when we're vulnerable, turn our moment of triumph into tragedy." Around them, the celebration continued, pack members laughing and drinking, oblivious to the approaching threat. In minutes, the hall would become a slaughterhouse. Unless they acted first. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic's voice carried easily over the crowd, stopping conversations mid-sentence. "It seems our enemies have decided to give us a wedding gift." The pack members' confusion was palpable, but the seasoned warriors among them began to tense, sensing their alpha's shift in mood. "Hostile forces are approaching from multiple directions," Kira said, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "Combat-ready wolves to defensive positions. Non-combatants to the safe rooms. This is not a drill." The transformation was immediate. Where moments before there had been a joyous celebration, now there was controlled chaos as the pack prepared for battle. Warriors moved to strategic positions, elders shepherded children to safety, and weapons appeared as if by magic. "Your wedding gift to me," Dominic said quietly to Kira as they prepared to defend their home, "is the chance to fight beside you as equals." "Your gift to me," she replied, checking her weapons, "is a pack worth dying for." The first explosions came as they reached the courtyard. But this time they were ready. This time, they fought not as alpha and subordinate, but as true partners. And when dawn broke over the battlefield, it illuminated not just their victory over Garrett's final assault, but the birth of something unprecedented in werewolf society. A mated pair whose combined strength had reshaped the very definition of pack leadership. The neighboring territories had taken notice. Some sought alliance with this new power. Others began preparing for war. But in the quiet moments between battles, as Kira and Dominic stood together watching their pack rebuild and grow stronger, they knew they had created something worth fighting for. A future where strength served justice, where merit determined worth, and where two warriors had become something greater than the sum of their parts. They were the Alpha King and Queen, and their reign had only just begun. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe for more.